Kill a Mockingbird, Reader's Digest version, Chapter 6, Part 2. Calpurnia wore her stiffest starched apron. She carried a tray of Charlotte. She backed up to the swinging door and pressed gently. Aunt Alexandra was letting Calpurnia serve the Missionary Society today. August was on the brink of September. Dill would be leaving for Meridian tomorrow. Today he was off swimming at Barker's Eddy with Jim. They said they were going in naked, and I couldn't come. Aunt Alexandra and her missionary circle were fighting the good fight all over the house. From the kitchen, I heard Mrs. Grace Merriweather giving a report in the living room on the squalid lives of the Marinas. It sounded like Marinas had so little sense of family that the whole tribe was one big family. A child had as many fathers as there were men in the community, as many mothers as there were women. A sainted missionary, J. Grimes Everett, was doing his utmost to change this state of affairs and desperately needed our prayers. The ladies of the Macomb, Alabama Methodist Episcopal Church South were behind J. Grimes Everett 100%. When Miss Merriweather concluded, the ladies adjourned to the dining room for refreshments. The gentle hum of their voices grew louder as Calpurnia opened the swinging door. Why, Alexandra, I never saw such Charlotte. Who'd have thought little dewberry tarts? Anybody tell you that the preacher's wife? No, well, she is, and that other one not walking yet. They became quiet, and I knew they had all been served. Calpurnia returned and put my mother's silver coffee pitcher on a tray. Can I carry it in, Cal? If you be careful, set it down by Miss Alexandra. She held the door open for me. Careful now, it's heavy. Aunt Alexandra smiled brilliantly at me. Stay with us, Jean Louise, she said. This was a part of her campaign to teach me to be a lady. Rather nervously, I took a seat beside Miss Maudie. Ladies in bunches always filled me with apprehension and a firm desire to be elsewhere. The ladies were cool in pastel prints. They smelled heavenly. You're mighty dressed up today, Miss Jean Louise, Miss Maudie said. Where are your breeches today? Under my dress. I hadn't meant to be funny, but the ladies laughed. My cheeks grew hot, but Miss Maudie's hand closed tightly on mine, and I said nothing. Its warmth was enough. Miss Grace Merriweather sat on my left, and I felt it would be polite to talk to her. Miss Merriweather was the most devout lady in Macomb. I searched for a topic of interest to her. What did you all study this afternoon? I asked. Oh, child, those poor Marinas, she said, and was off, living in that jungle with nobody but J. Grimes Everett. Not a white person will go near 'em, but that saintly J. Grimes Everett. Miss Merriweather's large brown eyes filled with tears. The poverty, the darkness, the immorality. Nobody but J. Grimes Everett knows. Miss Merriweather shook her head. Jean Louise, you are a fortunate girl. You live in a Christian home in a Christian town. Out there in J. Grimes Everett's land, there's nothing but sin and squalor. Yes, ma'am. Sin and squalor. What was that, Gertrude? Miss Merriweather turned to Miss Farrow, who was sitting beside her. Oh, that. Well, I always say forgive and forget. Thing that church ought to do is help her lead a Christian life for those children from here on out. Excuse me, Miss Merriweather, I interrupted. Are you all talking about Mayella Ewell? No, child, that darky's wife, Tom's wife. Miss Merriweather turned back to her neighbor. Gertrude, if we just let them know we've forgiven them, they'll stop grumbling the way they have since that trial. I tell you, there's nothing more distracting than a sulky darky. Just ruins your day to have one of them in the kitchen. You know what I said to my Sophie, Gertrude? Sophie, I said, it is simply not Christian to go around grumbling and complaining. Miss Farrow composed herself to speak. She was a splendidly built woman. Her hair was a mass of tight gray ringlets. She had a curious habit of prefacing everything she said with a soft, sibilant sound. Grace, she said, it's like I was telling Brother Hudson the other day. Brother Hudson, I said, we're fighting a losing battle. We try till we drop to make Christians out of them, but there's no lady safe in her bed these nights. Miss Merriweather nodded. Gertrude, there are some good but misguided people in this town. Good but misguided. Now, far be it from me to say who, but one of 'em thought he was doing the right thing a while back, but all he did was stir 'em up. His food doesn't stick in your throat, does it? Miss Maudie said. Two tight lines had appeared at the corners of her mouth. Maudie, I'm sure I don't know what you mean, said Miss Merriweather. I'm sure you do, Miss Maudie said shortly. She said no more. When Miss Maudie was angry, her brevity was icy, and something had made her deeply angry. Miss Merriweather reddened, glanced at me, and looked away. Aunt Alexandra got up from the table and swiftly passed more refreshments, neatly engaging Miss Merriweather and Mrs. Gates in brisk conversation. When she had them well on the road, she stepped back. She gave Miss Maudie a look of pure gratitude, and I wondered at the world of women. Miss Maudie and Aunt Alexandra had never been especially close, and here was Auntie silently thanking her for something. The front door slammed, and I heard Atticus's footsteps in the hall. It was not nearly time for him to be home. He stopped in the doorway. His hat was in his hand, and his face was white. "Excuse me, ladies," he said. "Don't let me disturb your meeting. Alexandra, could you come to the kitchen a minute?" He went on down the back hallway, and Aunt Alexandra and I met him in the kitchen. The dining room door opened, and Miss Maudie joined us. Calpurnia had half risen from her chair. "Cal," Atticus said, "I want you to go with me out to Tom Robinson's house." "What's the matter?" Aunt Alexandra asked, alarmed by the look on my father's face. "Tom's dead." Aunt Alexandra put her hands to her mouth. "They shot him," said Atticus. "He was running. It was during their exercise period. They said he just broke into a blind raving charge at the fence and started climbing over." "Didn't they give him any warning?" And Alexandra's voice shook. "Yes, the guards called to him to stop. They fired a few shots in the air, then to kill. They said if he'd had two good arms, he would have made it over the fence. He was moving that fast. Cal, I want you to come with me and help me tell Helen." Yes, sir," she murmured, fumbling at her apron. Miss Maudie went to Calpurnia and untied it. Atticus pushed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "We had a good chance," he said, "but I couldn't in truth tell him that we had more than that. I guess Tom was tired of white men's chances and preferred to take his own. You ready, Cal?" And Alexandra sat down and put her hands to her face. She sat so still. She was so quiet, I wondered if she would faint. I heard Miss Maudie breathing as if she had just climbed the steps, and in the dining room the ladies chattered happily. I thought Aunt Alexandra was crying, but when she took her hands away from her face, she only looked weary. Her voice was flat. "I can't say I approve of everything he does, Maudie, but he's my brother, and I just want to know when this will ever end." Her voice rose. "It tears him to pieces. He doesn't show it much, but what else do they want from him, Maudie? What else?" "Have you ever thought of it this way, Alexandra?" said Miss Maudie. "Whether Maycomb knows it or not, we're paying him the highest tribute we can pay a man. We trust him to do right. It's that simple." "Who is we?" Aunt Alexandra asked. "The handful of people in this town who say that fair play is not marked white only. The people with enough humility to think when they look at a Negro, there but for the Lord's kindness am I." I found myself shaking and couldn't stop. I had seen Enfield Prison Farm, and Atticus had pointed out the exercise yard to me. "Stop that shaking," commanded Miss Maudie, and I stopped. "Get up, Alexandra. We've left him long enough." And Alexandra rose. She said, "Do I show it?" "Not a sign. Are you together again, Jean Louise?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then let's join the ladies," Miss Maudie said grimly. I saw Aunt Alexandra's head go up as she went through the door. "Oh, Miss Perkins," she said, "you need some more coffee. Let me get it." "Calpurnia's on an errand for a few minutes, Grace," said Miss Maudie. "Let me pass you some of those dewberry tarts. Did you hear what that cousin of mine did the other day?" Aunt Alexandra looked across the room at me and smiled. I carefully picked up a tray of cookies, and with my very best company manners, I asked Miss Merriweather if she would have some. If Auntie could be a lady at a time like this, so could I.